episode of the show. I'm so excited that you're here today. I'm talking about developing a sense of self, why this matters, what this looks like for creatives, some common obstacles that many women of color creatives face when attempting to express themselves, some obvious and not so obvious outlets that you can use to practice self expression, and finally, some really simple ways that you can cultivate a more authentic version of yourself. If this sounds interesting to you, please stick around because I think this is going to be a good one. So let's start off by talking about how many of us creatives got started on this journey by wanting to imitate our creative heroes. If you're like me, you likely have been impacted by some type of art that really had a profound effect. And you thought to yourself, I could do that. I would love to do something like that and touch millions of hearts. And that got you on this track to really focusing on wanting to develop your skill, a technique, or just mastering your craft. But I think that what happens when we do this is that we get really caught up in comparing ourselves, especially nowadays with social media and just the constant exposure to all the things that everyone else is doing. We also put a bunch of pressure on ourselves to have an opinion, to force ourselves to share everything about ourselves because we think this is how we can be vulnerable and how we can connect with people, which is not entirely not true, but we just feel like we have to say everything and share everything, and we feel like we can't have some limits to what we share with the world. And there's also some very real scary reasons as to why we might be hesitating to share ourselves with the world. I mean, I'm literally doing it right now. Um, Doing this podcast is a way that I'm kind of forcing myself to get out of my comfort zone and put myself out there. And believe it or not, it's a very vulnerable place to be in because people are paying attention to you and they are paying attention to what you're saying. And so that can feel heavy for a lot of us who haven't grown up feeling like our voices mattered. And as women of color, many of us experience feelings of fear because we know what it's like to be judged and alienated for being who we are. There's racial trauma. There could be a history of violence or abuse in our lives. Many of us have been misunderstood and left to feel very lonely because of our neurodivergence and our sensory needs. People might see us as being very picky, very sensitive, difficult to be around. And so those feelings can really keep us from wanting to take risks and put ourselves out there. And for many of us, we were raised and forced to take on certain identities out of survival. Maybe you were the people pleaser or the caretaker, the black sheep. And maybe you were even raised by toxic people, negative people who didn't see you, who didn't understand you. Those experiences force us to take on personalities and coping mechanisms, even behaviors that aren't really our true identity, but we do it out of survival. We develop a distorted sense of who we are based on what others told us we were. And we didn't stop to question whether those distortions were accurate or not. And as we know, many people, regular people, the non creatives and neurotypicals, have no idea how different it feels to be in our shoes, to be creative people with neurodivergence and all the other things that make us who we are. It's crazy to think that we've given them so much power over our sense of self. For example, growing up, I was told that I was very sensitive, and I really believed this. And I remember I would hear people joking or making fun of me, and I would get hurt and express that I didn't like it. And because I couldn't take the joke, I was told that I was sensitive. And so that really made me question who I was and whether my feelings were right or not. And I think that I'm not alone in this experience. So many of us have been told that we're crazy because we speak up about something that we don't like or agree with. But the worst part is that we really internalize those feelings and we think there's something wrong with us. And somewhere along the way, we forgot that our art wasn't just a way to earn our self worth. We stopped taking into account what we wanted to experience and express with our art. And instead, we became very focused on what others expected of us. And we not only let them define us, but also our creative work. With all of this being said, what does it mean to self express? Well, in simple terms, expressing yourself is to share your unique point of view, your thoughts, your opinions, your feelings, ideas, basically who you are with others. And so you need to have a clear sense of who you are before you can express it. This is not to say that you have to wait until you figure out your whole self, everything about you, and have it nice and neat in a little box before you can start to make art. You can create art, but if you don't make that intentional choice to figure out how you want to express yourself, you can end up just creating art for the sake of art and wanting to be really good at a particular technique or a skill without the self expression part. And you can end up feeling really unfulfilled with this thing that you thought you were using for your own fulfillment. So you have to set an intention to use your creativity to express yourself. Now, let's talk about some common creative outlets for self expression. If you're wondering what creative outlets lend themselves best to expressing yourself, here are some to get you started. These might feel familiar, even maybe even obvious, but I still wanted to share them here in case someone is new to this or hasn't explored some of these different outlets. And I briefly want to share why they work. So, first on the list, we have storytelling. Storytelling is really powerful. I think it's at the core of many creative outlets because telling a story really allows for using our creativity, our imagination, and finding ways to say what we really want to say. And it can take the form of video, a song, a story, like a literal written story, a picture. Even illustrators use storytelling to create a series of images. So I think this one is really obvious. Next, we have writing and journaling. I kind of put them in the same category, even though they're not totally the same. But the idea is to work with words. Next is writing and journaling. And I put them in the same category, even though they're not totally the same. But for the sake of this example, when it comes to writing and journaling, the idea is that we're using words to, again, tell a story or document a series of events or get clear about what we think or how we feel about a topic. Writing is really accessible. And I think that this is a really great way to help us to share what we really think and feel. Next, we have illustration and comics. Again, these are slightly different, but I put them in the same category because here we're working with creating images, creating pictures to tell a story, to share an experience. And I think we are, a lot of us are very familiar with many of the little cute comics that we see on Instagram that feel so relatable because people are putting out an experience that we all can feel identified with. And so I think that this is a really great outlet. If you haven't tried it, I highly encourage you to check it out. And then we have performance and acting. So whether it's a song, music, dancing, singing, you can really do so much with performance and acting. And I took a class in college and I really enjoyed it. I think it's fun to get into the mindset of a different of a character or somebody else living a different life that is completely different from yours. It really helps you to understand how other people think, develop empathy, and it gives you a better sense of the kinds of characters that you relate to and the characteristics that those characters have. And it can tell you a lot about yourself. And I also feel that, for example, with stand-up comedians, they really get to almost process their emotions and their experiences by telling a funny story and having an audience laugh. So this is a great outlet. And then last here on my list is fashion. I think about fashion as a powerful way to express yourself. Growing up, being an alternative kid, being into punk rock and heavy metal, I loved observing how other people express their love for this music. And in my case, I love band shirts and spikes and dark colors, black, things like that. And so many people use fashion as a way to express who they are, whether that's being a minimalist, a maximalist, whatever it is. There's so much room to share who you are through the way that you dress. Less obvious ways to express yourself can include any of the following things, which I think are super interesting. Here on my list, I have collecting items. So, building collections of things that interest you, like rocks, stamps, memorabilia, is a really great way to showcase the kinds of things that you're interested in, that you're passionate about. And you can also tell stories about how you got those items. And it can be a great way to talk about yourself. There's also body modification, which is piercings and scarification type of thing. This also allows you to showcase your fashion sense, your identity, your cultural connections, your personal journey as a human being. And physical changes can be really transformative and validating. There's also organizing and decluttering spaces. This is one of my favorite ones. I really resonate with this one. I think there's something to be said about how somebody organizes their space, the way that they decorate, the way that they set different items in it. It says so much about who they are. And it also tells us about their inner state, the needs that they have for peace or order or even creativity. And there's customizing personal items like phone cases, water bottles, the lid of your laptop. This really shows your unique taste, your humor, maybe even your creativity through your everyday objects. Last on my list is digital communication style. This one is so interesting, and I think I'm seeing more of this now with the internet and social media and whatnot. People using memes and gifs and emojis to showcase their sense of humor or the way they react to certain situations. And I think this can really say so much that often words can't. And that's an art in itself. As you can see, after going over this list, there's a lot of different things that you can try, that you can explore when it comes to self expression. And there might be things there that you might want to try that you haven't done before that can really get you out of your comfort zone or become the thing that really does it for you, that allows you to share who you are in a way that feels really intuitive and aligned with the kind of person that you are. So I highly encourage you to check out this list, to think through it, and to reflect on the outlets that you're using to express yourself currently. Let's move on to discussing some simple ways that you can start to cultivate a more authentic version of you. And first on the list here is exploring personal interests. As you have seen from everything that I've been talking about, diving into the types of things that interest you, that you're passionate about, is going to be a really key thing to cultivate as an artist. Um, this is really hard for many of us. I know I had this problem for the longest time, giving myself permission to like what I like, to be a little quirky, a little odd with the things that I'm into. For example, I love taking classes, I love learning. I'm a bookworm, and so I love doing those things. And for a long time, I felt like that was weird and odd because, you know, what people perceive as normal is to go to parties, be very social, constantly be like extroverting, and that's just not who I am. So I really had to accept that my personal interests are different than what most people like or would think of doing during their weekends and whatnot. You can also try journaling. This is another one of my favorite ways to really get to know yourself. And I would love to do a whole episode on this, a whole class on this. And I would love to hear if this is something you're interested in. But journaling is so powerful and it doesn't have to be complicated. In exploring prompts that really resonate with you, that really spark something in you, could be a really great way to start. But for me, journaling has been a game changer because whenever I'm able to dump all the things that I'm thinking about, I'm able to get clarity about the things that I've been thinking about and that means something to me. And somehow that is connected to my art. It ends up being a part of my art in one way or another. So I really recommend that you explore this one. And there's a bunch of prompts out there in the internet that you can find, but start with something that you're wanting to explore about yourself. And I think this could be a great gateway into getting to know yourself better. Another idea is to explore your cultural heritage. As women of color creatives, we have so much to pull from. And this has been where I've been in the last few years. I've been exploring my indigenous roots and what that means and all the things around that. And also being Mexican and what that means growing up in the US and migrating. And I would love to talk more about that in future episodes. But the point here is whatever your background is, I think there's so much to explore there. There's a rich history that you can dive into, learn about your ancestors, your geographical area, whatever it is that interests you as a starting point, start there and see what you can pull and what are some themes that you would like to explore that can inspire you in your next project or even just for your own personal development. The next idea is to explore your personal values. And this is all about diving into looking at the things that you find important in your life, whether that's family, friendships, creating, making the world a better place, whatever it is. Those things could be a really great place to dive deeper into. Our values tend to be really critical as creatives because they will help us to decide whether or not to do a project or to create something for a cause that we really care about. And I just can't say enough good things about really spending the time getting clear on the things that you value, because this is going to serve you over and over throughout your career, throughout your journey as a creative person. And I think as a human being in general, being clear about where we stand with issues, with things in our environment, in our lives, is going to prove to be extremely useful. And it will help us to stay on the right path for us, because when we start to deviate from the things that really matter to us, that's where we start to feel like we are not being true to ourselves. So try it out. Last on my list is taking personality tests. And this has been so powerful in my own experience. I took the Myers-Briggs, that's where I started. And I also took the Clifton Strengths Finder. And those two tools have been so useful. With Myers-Briggs, I am an INFJ, in case you were wondering. And when I discovered this, it was life-changing. I didn't really understand myself for a really long time. I didn't understand why I was so different and almost contradictory in many ways. And then the whole neurodivergence thing was really insightful as well. But I really recommend using whatever tool speaks to you, resonates with you, to learn more about who you are and what you bring to the table. When I learned about my strengths, I realized how I could use them, or how I was already using them in a very intuitive way. And a lot of what I do now is lean into my strengths so that things are easy for me. because why would I want to struggle and do things the difficult way if I could just use my strengths to move forward? So check out free resources online. There's many free quizzes. And one note that I do want to make here is that it's important to take the results that you get out of those tests with a grain of salt and not make it your whole personality, but just let those tools be a starting point for your exploration, and don't let the labels define you, because so many people get caught up in labels, and sometimes that ends up defeating the whole purpose of using these tools. So just a word of caution in case you get stuck with those thoughts. Before ending this episode, I want to leave you with a couple of questions for reflection that you can take to your journal or record a voice memo on your phone if that's easier. But don't overthink it. Just go with whatever wants to rise to the top and go with that. The questions are: what are you trying to express with your art? And two, in what ways do you feel most free to express yourself? And in which ways do you feel most restricted? I think these questions are really going to help to start to get the ball rolling as you think about expressing yourself. And lastly, to recap, today we talked about the way that many of us focus very heavily on mastering a skill or a technique, and the way that we put pressure on ourselves to share who we are, even when we're not really sure what that is, while sacrificing our need for self-expression along the way with our art. A simple definition for what it means to express ourselves: obvious and not so obvious creative outlets that we can use for self-expression, and practical ways that we can develop a more authentic self. My hope is that by the end of this episode, you have a better idea of why it's so important to develop a clear sense of self. By getting clear on who we are and using our art as an intentional tool for self-expression, we can experience more joy and more fulfillment with our creative process, while also creating more unique and personalized work. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with somebody that you think can benefit from it. Feel free to DM me on Instagram at Renata McElveny and share your questions, any reflections, any suggestions for future episodes. I would love to hear your ideas. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and don't stop creating. Bye.